From Southern California, it's Heina, Dadabhoy. Did I say it? Dadabhoy.
Dadabhoy.
Yeah, she's like, Dadabhoy! Dadabhoy. Okay. There's a Howard Dean moment. Okay. Spent her childhood as a practicing Muslim, but never in her right mind would have believed that she would grow up to be an atheist, feminist, secular humanist. She currently blogs at Skepchick and is moving to Free Thought blog soon. She's been an active participant in atheist organizations around California.
Let's make this happen.
She's also a former student leader.
Okay, yeah, you can clip it.
Called A Skeptic's Guide to Islam. Please help me in welcoming
I don't have a pocket right now. Alrighty, good morning. You're already my heroes for being here at 10:30 in the morning, you know. I mean, although I think SSA has it right in terms of not having a 9 a.m. speaker slot. You know you're popular when they give you the hangover slot 9 a.m. on Sunday. But hey, the times those happened, there were more people in the auditorium when I got off the stage than when I got on, so I knew I was okay. All right, so I already heard some confusion from some people about the title of my talk. Let me say, it was a title I sort of came up with on the fly. If you have a suggestion for a better title, I am all ears, because I'm going to be giving this talk again at SSA East, and I'll probably be giving it more often because it's kind of my expertise, it's kind of my thing. So yeah, I love crowdsourcing because it means less work for me. So. All right, so let's start by defining my terms, since that's what's going on. So if you're curious about Arabic grammar, I don't know why you would be, but I might as well get into it a little bit. The default singular of any word is male, because, you know, patriarchy. And but it becomes universal in translation. So technically I was a Muslimah, not a Muslim, but I never called myself that unless I was being, I guess, super girl power pride, which, believe it or not, happens with Muslims too. But you know, none of that really matters. Let's get into the terms. So most of you know a Muslim is the singular word for a follower of the religion of Islam. Islam was the Abrahamic religion founded by Muhammad in 610 AD, although Muslims claim that it's the one true religion, and Judaism and Christianity used to be Islam, but then people corrupted it. The true facts, ask Muslims, they will explain to you that the truth is that Islam is the real religion. A Murtid is a noun meaning an apostate of Islam. That's all it means. It's someone who used to be a Muslim and left Islam. It's a specific thing where you have to publicly declare that you are no longer Muslim and not recant. I definitely fall into that category. Very few of us ex-Muslims use the term Murtid, though, because no one gets it. And we generally refer to ourselves as ex-Muslims. That's usually the term. And an apostate is somebody who specifically followed a religion, then left it. And according to Islamic law, most of you here, unless there's any ex-Muslims hanging out that I don't know about, in which case, come say hi. Seriously, we all need a network. There's so few of us, although we are growing in numbers. According to Islamic law, if you've never been a Muslim, and even if you're, you know, a horrible, hellbound atheist, you're less hellbound than I am. Because if you left Islam, you're definitely condemned to hell. Whereas if you've never been a Muslim, maybe you're a nice guy, maybe you get up to heaven, and maybe Allah will say, okay, you weren't too bad, go ahead, go to heaven. The lowest level, but still, you get to go to heaven. I, on the other hand, there's no hope for me. I'm also going to be using the term cultural Muslim, which is similar to Dawkins's use of cultural Christian, where basically some people identify as, you know, Muslim is my background, you know, I used to be, you know, because the problem with Islam is it takes over cultures. A lot of cultures around the world in countries that are dominated by Islam essentially become Muslim culture in a lot of ways. So yeah, some people use that term. I don't like it, but some people like it, and, you know, no problem there. I'm going to use the term progressive Muslim, which is a Muslim who challenges Muslim orthodoxy. Not very often does that happen, but it's becoming more and more of a thing. You'll see progressive Muslims online all the time. And there are questioning Muslims, which are just people who are examining their faith in a way that may or may not lead to apostasy, but is definitely beyond the scope of what we learned in Islamic school. And then I'm going to be Well, let's talk about this term actually. You don't have to remember this term, but it's an important concept. The term is ijtihad, which in Arabic means interpretation. According to Islamic orthodoxy, especially Sunni orthodoxy, so not the Shiite branch of Islam, but really more Sunnis, who are the majority, you're not supposed to interpret Islam anymore. The gates to interpretation were closed over 1,000 years ago, and nobody's supposed to question it. Now what Muslim scholars engage in is not interpretation, but qiyas, which means analogical reasoning. So you have to figure out an analogy for modern day problems with ancient problems that have already been decided on. Try doing that with stem cell research. Just try. It gets interesting. So that's part of the reason why, because Sunni Islam dominates the world, because most Sunnis believe that interpretation has been closed, you won't find that many questioning Muslims, at least not openly. Plus there's this whole myth that Muslims love spreading, that there is one true Islam, and Islam is one, and God is one, and the Muslim community is one. Complete and utter crap. I used to be a Muslim. There's nothing more the Muslims like to do than fight over their religion. But they love thinking that way. There's also an element of colonialist defensiveness. Well, okay, we're good. Okay. There's an element of colonialist defensiveness, and what I mean is European countries went into these, like the Middle East and other places where Islam dominated, and tried to impose European values on them, and now everybody's really mad about it and wants to do their own thing. So what ends up happening is you get these people who think that questioning Islam is essentially promoting this racist ideology that, Europeans have it all figured out and we all need to follow that. And there's also immigrant defensiveness, which is I'm kind of the product of, where immigrants come from other countries as, young people. They look around and they watch the news and they hear about all the 14-year-old pregnant women on crack in the United States, and they worry that their children will fall to the clutches of Satan, and so they become more religious than they ever were in their quote-unquote home country. My relatives back in the quote-unquote home countries are far less religious than my relatives here, because a lot of them, just decided to become more religious in the hopes that it would prevent their children from leaving Islam, or worse, marrying someone outside of the faith. So SSA and other secular groups can really become a space where questioning Muslims can find people who won't be mad that they're asking questions. I really feel like there's a lack of space for questioning Muslims. There's ex-Muslim spaces, there's Muslim spaces, but what about the people who are in between? And I feel that a lot of what I'm going to talk about today with helping questioning Muslims will also help ex-Muslims to feel more at home in these secular spaces. So one of the things that I really think we need to talk about is the fact that when we talk about religious privilege in the United States, which I think a lot of atheists have started talking about, we're not really talking about religious privilege. We're talking about Christian privilege. Being a Muslim was no privileges were afforded to me. My life is easier now that I'm not visibly a Muslim, quote unquote, although my name and my looks make people sometimes assume that I am. 10 Commandments monuments, those aren't exactly Quranic. They don't exactly benefit Muslims. And the Council on American and Islamic Relations, CARE, actually works with the ACLU and has been on the side of anti-religious establishment issues. So, when you come from a minority religion, you don't exactly have religious privilege, and you're not exactly happy about all the Christian stuff that's being integrated into the United States government. And like I alluded to, being an American Muslim is pretty darn tough. Pre 9/11, nobody knew what you were. They assumed you were a cancer patient if you wore a headscarf. And post 9/11, they assumed you were smuggling a bomb underneath all that cloth. Some people call this Islamophobia, which I think sometimes can be confusing because people assume that means you can't criticize Islam or you can be afraid of a religion. I prefer to call it anti-Muslim bigotry. The idea that anybody who's perceived to be Muslim does face a specific kind of racist bigotry that occurs. If you look at the idea of Campus Crusade for Christ, think about that. Now they call themselves Cru. But there's this national, possibly international, I'm not really sure, organization called Campus Crusade for Christ. Could you imagine a campus organization calling itself Campus Jihad for Allah? Could you? Never gonna happen. Even though crusade is more of a warlike word than jihad, because jihad means struggle. It can be spiritual or it could be physical. A crusade is literally picking up a sword and cutting off some heads, possibly of some Christians as well. So, there's no religious privilege there. The Patriot Act, too. I mean, post 9/11, my mother was saying things like, well, if it comes down to it, we can go back to Canada because my mom's a Canadian citizen. We were actually thinking that we might get kicked out of the country. We weren't sure what's going to happen. And, I mean, that obviously didn't happen, but there were people that I knew of who were thrown into prison without due process, American citizens, because they happened to be affiliated with something that maybe was terrorist. They weren't really sure. So it's not exactly that great. There was also a lot of ill-advised mosque targeting, which honestly, if the CIA and the FBI had consulted with me, I would have told them to not go to that mosque, but to go to the other mosque. They literally targeted the most liberal mosque I could think of, run by the most liberal guy. In my hometown, actually, of Irvine, California, the sheikh there, the leader, a lot of Muslims didn't like him because he was too progressive. He used to let the boys and the girls sit on opposite sides of the same room for the youth group. They thought that was too modern, too hip. And, well, I mean, I know a lot of marriages came out of the youth group, so, but, they targeted that mosque. This ex-felon approached them and said, oh, I think there's terrorist activity at this mosque. I'm going to pretend to be a convert. And he started actually rabble-rousing. Like, he would go to people's houses and hang out with them and say, oh, hey, do you want to do jihad, you guys? Seriously, there's an episode of This American Life on it, if you're curious about it. But they went to the most liberal mosque and were trying to stir up trouble. And guess what the people did? They called the FBI contact. They said, yo, this guy just showed up and he wants to do jihad. I don't know what the hell's going on. And the FBI guy didn't even ask for the guy's name and said, oh, we're on it, and hung up. And that's when everyone knew that something weird was going on. I mean, and like I said, if you're going to target that mosque, come on, there's way more fundy mosques where maybe you could dog someone into becoming a terrorist. Maybe. Not that one, though. So, and there's a lot of general racist and immigrant problems that Muslims face. The basic idea of being unable to see yourself depicted in media. The problem of, everybody assuming you're Christian or maybe quasi-religious. You're not taught the history of your own cultures and your own people, except in a very marginal way. I mean, I remember my world history textbook. Here's the chapter on the French Revolution. Here's the chapter of the entirety of the history of China. That's world history, allegedly. And there's also issues with cultural differences, and this is true across a lot of non-Western cultures, but the idea that you're more committed to a group ideology than an individualistic ideology. I still care about my family. I still prioritize family gatherings. I still want my parents to be as happy with me as they can be, given my situation. But I've had people advise me, well, if my parents treat me that way, I just say, screw you guys, I'm just going to cut you off forever. And I can't imagine doing that. The idea of just not caring anymore is just not something that I can conceive of. And so there's definitely more of that going on with a lot of immigrant cultures. All right, let's talk a little bit about some do's and don'ts for making your space more approachable towards ex-Muslims and questioning Muslims. This is going to sound really, really basic, but I'll enumerate on this point a little bit. The general principle is to respect our respective individual identities. In other words, just because you read Ayaan Hirsi Ali's book doesn't mean you know anything about the ex-Muslim that is trying to join your club. Muslims come from all over the world, have lots of different experiences, especially immigrant Muslims. So, you have to be respectful of that. The first thing I'm going to have to bring up is to actively and proactively avoid stereotyping and generalizing. You might say, oh, I'm not a racist, I'm not a bigot, I accept everybody. Well, there's a lot of unconscious biases that all of us carry, and I'm including myself in that number. You have to be more cognizant and even to the point of hypervigilance about this with minority groups, because the fact is you don't come across that many Muslims or ex-Muslims in your day-to-day life, probably for most of you. So the tendency is to sort of ascribe qualities that these individuals have to the group, because that's who you know. It's really easy to fall into stereotyping with that. You have limited examples to draw on. One example I can think of is recently there's been this viral nature of there's a set of pictures from a purity ball, and they're really creepy, where, you know, dads basically take charge of their daughters' virginities and date their daughters until they hand the hymen off to the husband on the wedding night. I'm not sure how it goes. I don't know how those people do it. But it's impossible for most of us in this room to truly believe that every single Christian is like that, because we know enough Christians, we've met enough Christians, we know enough to not think every single Christian participates in purity balls. On the other hand, I have gone to conferences and said I was an ex-Muslim or worn this little handy-dandy ex-Muslim necklace, and someone will pull me aside and grab me by the hand and say, "Do they know you're here? Are you okay? What do your parents think? Did your parents try to kill you? How many times did they try to kill you?" I'm not paraphrasing. I am not exaggerating here. And I have to go, whoa, my mom loves me. My dad, sometimes, but my mom definitely loves me. It's more true for ex-Muslims than Muslims, because we have all these stereotypes of Muslims, but there's even fewer ex-Muslims that most people know about or know of. And the ones that you hear about, the famous ones, do get their lives threatened because they are famous. That's a big part of it. I'm not saying it's their fault or anything, but, you know, that's just kind of how it goes. So you really need to trust ex-Muslims and questioning Muslims to know their own situation. You know, it comes across as really, really, really condescending when somebody shows up on Twitter and tells me, "Stay safe." I understand it comes from a good place. I understand they want me to be safe. I understand they care about me. But I have been doing this for 8 years. I have been a public ex-Muslim atheist out to my family, bearing my arms in my head for 8 years. I do not need some random person to tell me to stay safe. I will be fine, I promise. I was featured in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago, and it was this barrage of people, well-meaning people again, who just assumed that I was living on the edge. And honestly, my life isn't particularly dangerous. Maybe, you know, I'm courting danger by saying that. But, you know, there's too many ex-Muslims now for anyone to become a particular target. There are still people who are individually targeted. But, you know, I'm not the only out ex-Muslim out there. And a lot of us, you know, live fairly normal lives now. So another thing to keep in mind is that your advice to ex-Muslims or questioning Muslims about family issues may or may not apply. I alluded to it earlier, where, you know, there's more communal-based cultures than individualistic cultures. So unless the person is asking you for advice on how to deal with a specific situation, it's probably not the best idea to try and give them advice just because you may not know how that works out in their family. You know, not everybody is able or willing to just sort of strike out on their own and flip the middle finger to everybody in their family, you know. And then there's identity issues too. Some of us were raised with little to no knowledge of mainstream American culture. My parents got really religious when I was 5, so before that, I was fairly immersed in mainstream American culture. But after that, there's a huge black hole of knowledge. There are movies I just have not seen or heard of. There are quote-unquote normal experiences that I never had. I went to private Islamic school. You know, the idea of having a cafeteria that serves food, not a thing for me. These were crappy little schools. They were not good private schools. So there's a lot of just basic things that you might think are normal that everybody's experienced that an ex-Muslim or questioning Muslim may not have experienced. One way you can help is by introducing them to things. It was infinitely helpful to me when I first came out as an ex-Muslim to have friends who gave me movie recommendations, you know, who gave me a list of books that I should read or references. Urban Dictionary, that was very helpful. And now there's something even better called Know Your Meme. They don't just cover internet memes, they cover everything. When I met a former Muslim who's from another country, I gave her Know Your Meme and said, "You're welcome. Partake of this infinite sea of knowledge." And another thing that comes up, and this happened, was we tend to tease people who are out of touch with mainstream American culture. You know, "Oh, how do you not know that? Come on, how have you not seen Star Wars? How have you not seen The Wizard of Oz. And it's fine a little bit, but when it comes to ex-Muslims and questioning Muslims, sometimes that could be a tender point. Sometimes it could be sort of a way that can make them feel more other. It makes them feel more alienated. And obviously this is on a case-by-case basis, but sometimes we don't realize how much we're teasing this particular person. I think it had to do with, I did grow up watching cartoons, but I had a friend who used to tease me incessantly about all the live-action movies I'd never seen. And then at one point I blew it. I just turned around and I said, "It's not my fault. I was a scarf-wearing fundy. I'm sorry. I haven't seen all these movies that everybody has seen." Netflix is great, though. There's also something you can do where you can refer people to each other. Network. So if you know an ex-Muslim and you meet another ex-Muslim, give them each other's emails. I mean, with permission, of course. But if you don't know any ex-Muslims and an ex-Muslim approaches your group and wants to join, if you have any ex-Mormons there, ex-Pentecostals, ex-evangelicals, they're great. My very first group of friends after I left Islam were ex-Mormons because they got it. They understood what it's like to leave an entire identity and culture behind and to have your parents be really, really mad at you. They understood. Another thing to keep in mind is that ex-Muslims, and I'm the last person in the world to whom this applies, but I'm going to say this anyway, they're not all your personal knowledge dispensers. I get it. You're curious. We're all curious, right? I would be curious if I was a non-Muslim and I met an ex-Muslim. But some of us want to teach you and some of us don't. Some of us are happy to talk about topics we're interested in and not talk about other topics. Some of us may not want to talk about it at all. I know some ex-Muslims who just never want to talk about Islam. They don't join ex-Muslim groups for that reason. They just want to leave it all behind and move on. And that's okay too. That should be respected. And some ex-Muslims, believe it or not, just were not devout enough as Muslims to answer your questions. You can ask them something about the Quran and they're like, I don't know. Go look it up. Go talk to a scholar. Or they may not have been in the right cultural context for it. For me personally, as an ex-Muslim, I got a lot of questions about female genital mutilation. I don't know much about it. I come from a culture where that is unheard of. When I first heard of FGM as a child, I asked my mom about it and she said, God doesn't allow us to do that. That's the culture I grew up in. That's the Islam I knew, where FGM was not allowed. And so to be asked all these questions, or to even be asked about the state of my genitals, don't do that. Seriously, just leave it. There are excellent resources online for this sort of thing. That brings me to my next point. The internet is your friend. Google is your friend. And sure, there are some sources that are not that great, but there are some sources who are. And I can recommend a couple. There are ex-Muslims like KlingScore. He makes all these videos that are really great. Ex-Muslims of North America. We have a great website, blog, etc. I say we like I actually did any of it. I'm just a member. I didn't do any of that. But there's a website, there's an aggregate of blogs. We have our public Facebook page. I blog about Islam all the time. There's other free thought bloggers, Maryam Namazi, Taslima Nasreen. Marwa Barrow, who writes Between a Veil and a Dark Place, is also joining free thought blogs with me next month. So there's lots of people you can access. There's a lot of resources out there who are willing to talk to you. You don't have to inundate this poor ex-Muslim, hypothetically, who's joining your group with all these questions. It's the same, and I'm going to make this analogy now. We got to start off this conference right. It's very similar to issues of sexual consent. If you treat a person exclusively as a satisfier of your desires and wants and wishes, you're disrespecting them and objectifying them. But if you treat them as a full person and consider their wants, needs, and desires, then you're not. So the same thing applies with ex-Muslims. If you understand who they are, if you're treating them as a full person and figuring out whether or not they want to talk about this stuff, then you're good. Ask lots of questions if they're open to it, but not if the other way around. And actually on that note, I'm going to make a special request of you because I like to leave lots of time for Q&A. But for this particular Q&A, I'm going to ask that we prioritize questions germane to this particular talk. So if you have general questions about Islam, feel free to ask them after you've looked around the room to see if someone is very eager to raise their hand. So if you have a question about this particular topic, not just Islam in general, please be the first to raise your hand. But if we don't get any questions about this topic, I'm happy to answer general questions about Islam. And honestly, I usually am. I mean, I get random emails all the time. I even have an anonymous ask box. I mean, I mostly get trolls there. But if you want to ask a question about Islam and you're embarrassed and don't want it attached to your name, find me on Ask FM. Find me on Twitter. My email's out there. I'm very easy to find. You can Google just my first name and find me. I'm not hiding. All right. And I guess the flip side of the knowledge dispenser thing is don't treat every ex-Muslim or questioning Muslim as your personal annoyance receivers. You know, many of us have mixed feelings about our Muslim backgrounds. There are some things that I just don't agree with other atheists about when it comes to criticizing Islam. You know, so if someone shows up to your group and says, I'm an ex-Muslim, the first thing that comes out of your mouth shouldn't be, oh man, Muhammad was such a gross pedo, am I right? Like, all of us know he married a child, all right? You know, it's just, it's harped on so much, and it's sometimes not the best first move to make. And I actually have a lot of feelings and thoughts about Aisha, Muhammad's child bride, because I feel like we reduce her to a child bride when she lived to her 80s and was a war leader and was partially responsible for the great schism that led to the two dominant sects of Islam. So the fact that we reduce her to, oh, Muhammad married her, is sort of sad to me. And if you talk about Aisha, that's what you're going to hear. You're going to hear my rant about how much of a badass she was. Again, it comes back to asking questions and not assuming. Another concern that comes up with ex-Muslims in particular is privacy. I'm out loud proud, I really don't care. But there are a lot of closet cases in the ex-Muslim community. There are a lot of people who have completely separate Facebooks that they only access at the library at school. There are people who are like me, put it all out there. And then there's people all the way in between. I had a lot of family and community member stalkers when I first came out as an atheist. They were Googling screen names I hadn't used since I was 12 to find information on me. They were checking and rechecking my MySpace, because that was the thing back then. I don't know if some of you youngins know, but MySpace was like the pre-Facebook, and they were checking it weekly, sometimes it seemed daily, to see if I had posted anything that would be visible to them. They were basically checking up on my privacy settings. And that actually ended up backfiring me on one time, and which is how I found out about this, because there was a picture of me and my sister in tank tops, and I come home and my dad's furious, and I'm like, what happened? What happened? And he goes, are you a whore? Then why do you dress like one? I'm like, what are you talking about? And I was just wearing a tank top. But that can happen. So be really careful with pictures, seriously. If you're doing an SSA event and you've got an ex-Muslim there, be sure you have their consent to photograph them or tag them. Ask them what their personal rules are about social media. Because even casual revelations to the wrong person might have dire consequences. This happened in college. I was friends with this guy. His name is Joe. There are a lot of Joes out there, so he's probably still anonymous. But I'm going to call the girl S because her name is very distinctive. And this actually brings up one of the privacy concerns that a lot of ex-Muslims have. We have uncommon names. So I can talk about Joe all I want, and you will never be able to figure out which Joe I'm talking about. But if I mention S's full name, you could probably go find my alma mater, find her, and find out who she was. And she considers herself a progressive Muslim, but he asked her out, and she just never got back to him. She did the soft no. He got angry and emailed. He found her online and emailed everyone she knew, claiming that she was a total slut and she had done this and that. And it just shows that even casual sort of things like that, even her telling him her full first name was enough to get all this drama started. So you really have to be careful with even casual revelations. You don't know who knows who, especially on college campuses. You may be talking to someone, they look kind of brown, but you don't really know if they're Muslim. And you mention something about this ex-Muslim and bam, suddenly the whole Muslim community knows. It's a small world there. And you should really respect boundaries in general. I grew up so different and so cloistered from the mainstream. At age 10, I donned a headscarf and stopped hugging even my male cousins. I had a lot of guys when I first came out as an ex-Muslim, I don't know if it was creepy or not, I'm still undecided, who really, really wanted me to break those barriers with them. And I don't mean sexually, I mean like, they're like, you've never shaken hands with a man? You want to shake my hand? Or, I hug all my female friends. No. You know, it was weird for me. I didn't, especially if it was a dude I was even a little bit attracted to, because, you know, if you've never touched somebody outside of your family and you're hugging someone who you're attracted to, it gets awkward really fast. And, you know, I mean, thanks to a couple of people who I was close to who pushed me a little bit, but not too much, I am where I am today. But really just, you know, be careful, be thoughtful. It's really hard to come out of that devout of a religion back into the mainstream world. Another thing that happens is because of the aforementioned lack of knowledge of mainstream culture, a lot of us are kind of vulnerable when we first come out as formerly religious. We don't really need condescension, obviously, but be explicit when you're talking about cultural norms. Don't assume that they'll understand them implicitly. There are things that I just had no idea about. All right, I think I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because I do want some time for Q&A. But things like alcohol, I wasn't around casual drinking. I didn't understand how drinking worked. All right, let's skip forward. Also, be careful the way you interpret their actions. And I had this problem happen when, you know, I started dressing a little bit more flashy, a little bit more revealing, more makeup. People were telling me things like, you're submitting to the patriarchy. I'm like, no, I'm actually going against the patriarchy I was raised with. I'm actually rebelling. For you, you know, nudes are everywhere. For me, it's kind of a big deal to, you know, show my shoulders off. So, you know, be thoughtful of the different cultural contexts. But this will continue, I think, to be more and more of an issue as more and more ex-Muslims come out. All right, we have a couple of minutes for Q&A. How many minutes do we have left? 4 minutes. Okay, 2 or 3 questions. Make them good, y'all. No pressure. All right, green shirt.
What's your favorite mainstream culture thing that you found out about well after the fact?
Oh man, so many things.
All right, what's your favorite movie then?
What's my favorite movie? I don't have one favorite movie.
That you didn't find out about.
The Fifth Element. That's a fantastic movie. If I looked anything like Lilu, I'd be cosplaying her right now. All right. Greta.
Do you think it can be useful for secular student groups to build bridges with Islam and Muslim groups on campus?
That's a hard one because generally Muslim groups are going to be suspicious. I know the campus Muslim group that I was a part of the 1 year I was a Muslim in college was very suspicious. Interfaith was a bad word there, let alone inner lack of faith. But progressive Muslims are really willing to build bridges though. There are a lot of progressive Muslims who you'll see I will tweet with and am Facebook friends with. And these are people who, you know, respect who I am, understand what I'm trying to do, and we're on the same side with social justice issues. So yeah, progressive Muslims are definitely worth building bridges with. I actively do that myself. Yes?
So we often counsel younger from Christians, or particularly funded Christian families, to atheists, to sort of slow down, relax, not be in any big hurry to come out to their folks, often until they're sort of financially independent. Is there anything which would be specifically sensitive to regarding the Muslim?
Oh, yeah, actually that's one of the things I didn't get a chance to touch on. I had no idea how economics worked, really, because I was raised with the expectation that my father would take care of me and then I would marry and then my husband would take care of me. So there's a lot of just basic stuff that I just was kept from, and it's not necessarily a function of religion. I think it's more a function of just the way my family worked, but it's not uncommon. So definitely one of the things that, you know, could help is to bring that up, that, you know, maybe you want to be financially independent before you do anything, but also just teaching some basic stuff, you know, opening bank accounts, getting loans, things like that. Yes, in the back.
So I'm a little hesitant because I feel like we don't want to assume anything, but we also want to be helpful in people perhaps learn what they don't know. So how do you kind of walk
Well, I guess the difference is making sure you're not projecting individual traits onto a group. Because groups do have traits. We can look at cultures and say culturally, cultures tend to be this way. But certain aspects of certain cultures get overhyped. So the idea of honor killings. Someone asked me, oh, wouldn't your parents honor kill you? I'm like, I've never known anybody to be honor killed. That's just not a thing in the community I grew up in. So that's something that a tiny minority does that everybody assumes this group does. So if you look at it sort of factually, statistically, and say, okay, this might be more of an individual trait rather than a group trait. And that's where asking a lot of questions comes in. Not the interrogation about Islam, because they may or may not be amenable to it, but asking them about their personal situation. So when somebody asks me, how do your parents feel about your atheism? I'm more inclined to respond positively than, how many times did they try to kill you? And it's a learning curve thing. Yes. Black shirt, sorry.
Actually, I was just wondering, have you come across anybody like that who came from the really draconian,
The short answer to that is yes, I have to stop. Marwa Barrow, read her blog, Between a Veil and a Dark Place. She talks about that. She did have a very hard upbringing. Yeah.